At 59 years old, with $17 in her checking account and a disconnection notice taped to her front door, Dorothy made a decision so small that her daughter laughed when she heard it. But in the next 4 months, that tiny decision unraveled everything she thought she knew about money, about worth, and about the kind of woman she had spent her whole life pretending to be. What she did is so simple that most people refuse to believe it actually worked. You know that feeling when you open your purse at the register and your hand is already shaking before your fingers even touch your wallet? That quiet panic that lives just beneath your smile. That moment when you say, I'm fine, so many times in a row that the words stop meaning anything at all. Dorothy knew that feeling like she knew her own name. She had spent decades being the woman who figured it out, the one who stretched a $20 bill across a whole week of groceries, the one who said, no, you go ahead, I already ate, at work lunches she couldn't afford. The one who bought birthday presents for her grandchildren and then skipped her own electricity bill, telling herself it was love, telling herself sacrifice was just another word for good mothering. And every single month, without fail, the numbers never added up. And every single month, without fail, she told herself next month would be different. It never was. But here is the thing nobody tells you about women like Dorothy. It was never really about the money. Her name was Dorothy Mae Collins, but everyone called her Dot. She was 58 years old when this story begins, a home health aide in a mid-sized city in Georgia, the kind of place where everyone knows your church, but nobody knows your bank balance. Dot had been doing this work for 22 years. She woke up at 5 in the morning, packed her bag, drove her 11-year-old car across town, and spent her days bathing, feeding, and sitting with elderly people who could no longer take care of themselves. She held their hands when they were scared. She talked to them when their families didn't call. She brought them soup on days that weren't in her job description, and stayed late on nights when she could see in their eyes that they didn't want to be alone. She was extraordinary at caring for other people. She had 2 grown daughters, 3 grandchildren, a small apartment with a leaky faucet she'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, and a dream she kept folded up in the back of her mind like an old receipt she was afraid to throw away. The dream was simple, almost embarrassing in how ordinary it was. She wanted to have $500 in savings that nobody needed from her. Just $500 that was hers. A small cushion. A little breath of air between her and the next crisis. In 22 years, she had never once gotten there. Every time she got close, something happened. The car needed brakes. Her youngest daughter needed rent money. A grandchild needed school supplies. Her mother, before she passed, needed medication. There was always something, and Dot was always the one the something came to. She didn't resent it. That was the thing that made it so complicated. She genuinely didn't resent it. She had been raised to believe that a woman's love was measured by what she gave up. And Dot loved fiercely, with everything she had, down to the last $17 in her account. The disconnection notice on her door was for her electricity. She had 48 hours to pay $112 or the power would be cut off. She had $17. What happened next is the part of the story that Dot doesn't tell easily. Even now, she has to stop and breathe before she gets through it. 3 weeks before the disconnection notice appeared, Dot had actually been okay. Not comfortable, not saved, but okay. She had managed to set aside $140 over 6 weeks, the result of skipping her Friday lunches, selling a pair of earrings she'd been given as a birthday gift, and picking up an extra shift on a Sunday she was supposed to rest. She kept the money in a separate envelope in her underwear drawer. She had written, "Mine," on the outside of it in red marker. It was the first time in years she had felt something close to solid ground under her feet. Her oldest daughter, Renee, called on a Tuesday evening. Renee had a good job, a nice house, a husband who worked. Renee was the one Dot had sacrificed the most for, the one who had gone to college, the one who sent flowers on Mother's Day and called every Sunday. Renee was, by every measure, the daughter who had made it. "Mama," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to say yes." Dot already knew. She felt it in her chest before the words came. Renee explained that she and her husband had overextended on a vacation, that their account was short, that they just needed $120 to cover a bill that was coming out automatically the next morning. "I'll pay you back by Friday," she said. "I promise, Mama. You know I'm good for it." And here is the part that broke something in Dot, quietly, in a way she didn't even recognize as breaking at the time. She said yes. She went to her underwear drawer. She took the envelope. She counted out $120, and she drove it to her daughter's house that same night. And when Renee hugged her at the door and said, "You're a lifesaver, Mama," Dot smiled and said, "That's what I'm here for." She drove home with $20 left in the envelope. Friday came. Renee didn't call about the money. Dot didn't ask. Saturday came. Sunday came. Renee called on Sunday, like she always did, and they talked for 30 minutes about the grandchildren and the weather and a new restaurant that had opened near Renee's house. Neither of them mentioned the money. Dot hung up the phone and sat in her kitchen in the dark for a long time. Then the electricity notice appeared on her door. She did the math. $112, $17 in her account. She was $95 short of keeping her lights on. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the red marker on the empty envelope. "Mine." She had written it herself, and it had not been enough. It had not protected anything. That night, for the first time in a long time, Dot cried without stopping herself. Not quiet tears, but the kind that come from somewhere deep and old, the kind that have been waiting a very long time for permission. She cried for the envelope. She cried for the earrings she had sold. She cried for 22 years of early mornings and strangers' hands and skipped lunches. She cried because she was 58 years old and she was scared of the dark, not the metaphorical dark, the actual dark that was coming in 48 hours if she couldn't find $95. And then she did something she had never done before. She almost didn't go to work the next morning. She sat on the edge of that bed, still in yesterday's clothes, and she thought, what is the point? What is the actual point of getting up? I have worked every day of my adult life, and I have nothing. I have given everything I had, and I have a disconnection notice, and an empty envelope and $17. What is the point of any of it? She sat there for a very long time. The only thing that moved her was the thought of Mr. Harold, 83 years old, who needed his blood pressure medication at 7:30 and who had told her once, with tears in his eyes, that she was the only person he looked forward to seeing. She got up for Mr. Harold, not for herself, not yet, but she got up. The woman's name was Gloria. Dot met her in the parking lot of a discount grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 days after the worst night, the day before the power was due to be cut. Dot had gone to the store to buy the cheapest things she could find to get through the week. She was standing next to her car, staring at her receipt, doing the math in her head, when she heard a voice beside her. "You're counting wrong." Dot looked up. A small woman, maybe 70, maybe older, with white hair pulled back neat and a grocery bag on each arm, and the kind of eyes that looked like they had seen a lot and decided not to be bitter about any of it. "Excuse me?" Dot said. The woman nodded toward the receipt in Dot's hand. "Whatever you're calculating right now, you're starting from the wrong number." Dot didn't know what to say to that. She almost said, "I'm fine," out of pure reflex. She almost smiled and walked away. But something in her, maybe the 22 years of exhaustion, maybe the empty envelope still sitting on her dresser, made her stop. "I don't even know what the right number is," Dot said. The woman set one of her grocery bags on the hood of the car, carefully, like she had all the time in the world. She looked at Dot with no pity and no performance, just a steady, quiet attention that felt almost strange, like being really seen by someone who had no reason to look. "How long have you been doing it this way?" she asked. "Doing what?" "Taking care of everybody else first." Dot felt her throat close. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Gloria, who introduced herself with a handshake that was firmer than Dot expected, had a way of letting silence do the heavy work. She didn't explain herself. She didn't launch into advice. She just waited, like she already knew the answer, and was giving Dot the chance to hear it herself. They stood in that parking lot for 40 minutes. Dot doesn't remember exactly how the conversation moved from one place to another, but she remembers the things Gloria said because they were so few, and each one landed like a stone dropping into still water. A woman who pours from an empty cup doesn't love more. She just disappears slower. That was the first one. Dot had heard something like it before, on a motivational poster somewhere. But the way Gloria said it, flat and quiet, and without any decoration, it sounded different. It sounded true in a way that posters never do. You taught everyone around you exactly how to treat you. You can teach them something different. Dot opened her mouth to argue. Gloria raised one hand, just slightly, and Dot closed it again. Not because they're bad, because you never showed them you had a bottom. Before she left, Gloria reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad and a pen. She wrote something down, tore the page out, and handed it to Dot. Yarin Budvada Serind, and handed it to Dot. On it was a single sentence. The first person who needs to believe you're worth protecting is you. She picked up her grocery bag, nodded once, and walked to her car. Dot stood in that parking lot alone, holding a piece of paper from a stranger, with the disconnection notice still waiting at home and $17 still in her account. And something cracked open. The first thing Dot did when she got home was call Renee. Not to ask for the money back, not to fight. She called, and she said, calmly, without anger but without apology, I need the $120 back by tomorrow morning. My electricity is being cut off. The silence on the other end was so long that Dot thought the call had dropped. Then Renee said, Mama, I thought you were okay. I wasn't, Dot said. I just didn't say so. And that was the first lesson. Not a lesson anyone taught her in a classroom, not a lesson from a book, but one that arrived like a slap and a hug at the same time. Dot had spent decades performing okayness so convincingly that the people who loved her most had no idea she was drowning. She had believed that asking for honesty about her own needs was a kind of weakness. What she discovered in that phone call was that silence had not protected anyone. It had just made her invisible inside her own family. Renee brought the money the next morning, she cried. Dot held her and felt something clarify inside her chest, like a window being cleaned for the first time in years. But here is where the story breaks from what you might expect. Dot thought that honesty would make things easier. She thought that once she told the truth about her situation, the burden would lift. She was wrong. When she started saying no to things she couldn't afford, when she started telling her daughters that she had her own bills and her own goals, the reaction was not relief. It was resistance. Her youngest daughter called her selfish. A neighbor who had borrowed money twice and never paid it back stopped speaking to her. A woman at her church who had always leaned on Dot for extra help looked at her with something close to betrayal. Dot had expected freedom. What she got, at first, was loneliness. She sat with that loneliness for 3 weeks. It was harder than the disconnection notice. It was harder than the empty envelope, because the disconnection notice was about money, and this was about identity. She had been the woman everyone came to for so long that when she stopped, she didn't know who she was without that role. One evening she sat at her kitchen table with a piece of paper and wrote down every person in her life who had ever asked how she was and waited for the actual answer. She wrote for a long time. The list had 2 names on it. One was her late mother. One was Gloria, a stranger in a parking lot. She looked at that list for a long time, and the second lesson arrived, not gently, but with the force of something she had been avoiding for 22 years. She had built a life full of people she served and almost empty of people who saw her. And she had called that love. She had called that a rich life. But a life where you are needed is not the same as a life where you are known. She folded the paper and put it in her Bible. The third lesson came 6 weeks later, and it came disguised as a good thing. Dot had been doing something new, Every payday, before she paid a single bill, before she sent a single dollar to anyone, she moved $40 into a separate account she had opened at a credit union across town. An account nobody else knew about, an account with no debit card attached to it, just a number on a piece of paper that she kept folded inside that notepad Gloria had given her. After 6 weeks, she had $240. It was the most money she had ever protected for herself in her adult life. And then her car needed a repair. The estimate was $310. She sat in the mechanic's waiting room and felt the familiar pull. Use the savings. Start over. The money is just sitting there, and this is a real emergency. This is exactly what savings is for. She almost did it. She had her hand on her phone, ready to transfer the money, when she stopped, because she realized she had thought of that savings account as an emergency fund. But Gloria's words came back to her, quiet and exact. The first person who needs to believe you're worth protecting is you. An emergency fund protects you from crisis. But what she was building was something different. She was building proof to herself that she existed beyond everyone else's needs, that she had a self worth investing in. If she emptied it the first time something hard happened, she would be teaching herself the same lesson she had always known, that her needs come last, that she is always the one who gives. She called her youngest daughter instead, the one who had called her selfish, and asked if she could borrow $200 for the car repair, promising to pay it back over 2 months. The daughter said yes, and something shifted between them, something small and important. For the first time, Dot was on the receiving end. For the first time, she let someone else hold something for her. She paid it back, every dollar, on the schedule she had promised. The fourth lesson took the longest to arrive, and it arrived in the body before it arrived in the mind. Dot noticed one morning, about 3 months into this new way of living, that she had stopped shaking when she opened her purse, that the panic that had lived just beneath her smile for 22 years was quieter, not gone, but quieter. She wasn't rich. She wasn't even comfortable, not by most measures. But she had over $400 in an account with her name on it, and no card attached. And she had a boundary she had kept, and she had let someone help her, and she had told the truth about her situation to people she loved. And she realized, standing at the register at the grocery store one morning without her hand trembling, that financial peace is not a number in an account. It is a relationship with yourself. It is the practiced, repeated act of treating your own future as something worth showing up for. You cannot budget your way into self-worth, but you can act your way there, one small, uncomfortable, honest decision at a time, until the actions start to feel like who you are. By the time Dot turned 59, 4 months after the parking lot, she had $870 in the credit union account. Not a fortune. She would be the first to tell you that, but $870 that had never belonged to anyone else. $870 she had moved there before she paid a single bill, before she answered a single request, before she asked anyone's permission. She had also done something nobody expected. She sat down with both her daughters and had a conversation she had rehearsed a dozen times in her bathroom mirror before she could get through it without crying. She told them, clearly and without drama, what she earned, what she owed, and what she was building. She told them that she loved them completely and that she could no longer be the financial floor beneath their feet. She told them that she wanted a real relationship with them, not a transaction. She told them she was 59 years old and she intended to stop disappearing. Renee cried. Her youngest daughter got quiet in the way that meant she was thinking instead of reacting. Neither of them walked out. A week later, Renee called and asked if they could have lunch, just the two of them. No emergency, no favor, just lunch. They sat in a diner for 2 hours and talked about things they had never talked about before. Renee told Dot things about her marriage that she had been carrying alone. Dot told Renee things about her own loneliness that she had never said out loud. They held hands across the table like they hadn't done since Renee was a little girl. Dot told me later that it was the first time in decades she had felt like her daughter's mother, instead of her daughter's resource. At work, something changed too. Her supervisor, a woman 10 years younger who had always been cordial but distant, stopped her in the hallway one afternoon and said, "Dot, I don't know what's different about you lately, but whatever it is, keep doing it." Dot didn't know how to explain it, so she just said, "I started paying myself first." Her supervisor looked at her for a moment and then said, quietly, "I needed to hear that." Mr. Harold, 83 years old, and sharper than people gave him credit for, noticed too. One morning he looked at her from his armchair and said, "Miss Dot, you look rested." She hadn't slept any more than usual, but something about her had settled, and even an 83-year-old man in a recliner could feel it. The leaky faucet got fixed. She hired someone to fix it, and she paid them out of her regular account without guilt because she had planned for it, because she had decided that her home was worth maintaining, because she was worth a faucet that didn't drip at 2 in the morning and remind her of everything that was broken. She was not a different woman. She was the same Dorothy Mae Collins who had gotten up at 5 in the morning for 22 years and driven across town in an 11-year-old car and held strangers' hands and skipped lunch. But she had stopped performing okayness. She had stopped being invisible inside her own life, and the world, strangely, had not fallen apart. The people who loved her had not left. They had, in fact, moved closer. She met the woman at her church, sitting alone in the third pew from the back after a Sunday service, long after everyone else had gone. Her name was Patricia, and she was 44 years old, and she had the look that Dot recognized immediately, the look of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and is starting to wonder if they can put it down without everything collapsing. Dot sat beside her. She didn't say anything at first. She had learned something from Gloria about the weight of silence. After a while, Patricia said, "I don't know how to stop giving everything away." Dot thought about the parking lot. She thought about the empty envelope with mine written on it in red marker. She thought about $17 and a disconnection notice and 40 minutes with a stranger who had firm handshake and very few words. She reached into her purse and pulled out the small notepad Gloria had given her, the one she still carried. She opened it to the inside front cover, where she had copied Gloria's sentence in her own handwriting. She handed it to Patricia without saying a word. Patricia read it. She read it again. Her eyes filled. Dot put her hand over Patricia's hand, the same way she held Mr. Harold's hand, the same way she had held her mother's hand. But this time it was different. This time she was not pouring from empty. This time she had something real to give because she had finally learned to keep some of it for herself. "It starts with one small thing," Dot said. "One thing you do just for yourself before you do anything for anybody else. It doesn't have to be money. It can be 10 minutes. It can be a cup of coffee you drink while it's still hot." Patricia looked at her. "Does it get easier?" Dot considered the question honestly, the way Gloria would have. "It gets truer," she said. She thought about Gloria then, the small woman with white hair and firm hands and grocery bags on each arm and eyes that had seen a lot and decided not to be bitter. She had never seen her again after that parking lot. She didn't know her last name. She didn't know her church or her neighborhood or her story. But she carried her every day in a notepad in her purse and in the $870 in an account with no debit card, and in the way she no longer shook when she opened her wallet. Some people come into your life to stay, and some people come to hand you the one thing you were missing and trust you to carry it forward. Gloria had handed Dot a sentence. Dot had handed Patricia a notepad. And somewhere, in a diner booth, or a parking lot, or the third pew from the back of a quiet church, the next woman was already waiting. If you watched this whole story and something in your chest recognized it, I want you to sit with that for a second. Because maybe you're not 59, maybe you're 38 or 46 or 62. Maybe your name isn't Dorothy and your story doesn't look exactly like hers. But maybe you know what it feels like to write mine on something and then hand it away anyway. Maybe you know what it feels like to say, "I'm fine, So many times it becomes a kind of lie you tell without even noticing. Maybe you know what it feels like to be surrounded by people who need you and still feel completely quietly alone. If any part of this story felt like someone was talking directly to you, it was not a coincidence. I want you to do one thing right now, just one. Comment below, and tell me one thing you are going to do today just for yourself. It does not have to be big. It can be a walk. It can be a meal you actually sit down to eat. It can be a savings account you open with $20. It can be a conversation you've been avoiding. Whatever it is, write it down here. I want to read every single one. And if you have a sister, a friend, a co-worker, a woman in your life who is running on empty and still showing up for everyone else, share this story with her today, not tomorrow. Today, because sometimes the thing that changes everything is 40 minutes in a parking lot with a stranger who says exactly the right sentence. You have been somebody's answer for a long time. It is not selfish to finally be your own.